Story 1. I'm a security guard for a mid-sized office building. It's right in the center of the city, a place where crime rates are high. Break-ins at night aren't unusual, and businesses around here take big losses when they happen. Usually, I have a coworker with me, but this month, I was alone while the company trained a new employee. I didn't mind too much. Being alone made the shifts longer, harder to stay awake, but having a partner could be annoying depending on the person. About 2 weeks into the month, I was patrolling the lot, the same as always when I noticed them. 2 men, standing across the road in the dark, watching. I couldn't tell if they were looking at me or at the building, but either way it felt wrong. Something about the way they stood there, motionless, just staring, put a knot in my stomach. The next time I made my rounds, they were gone. I took a mental note, but I didn't dwell on it. The rest of the night was quiet. My shift ended at 6 a.m. with nothing to report. The next few nights were uneventful. Then, at the end of the week, they came back. Same spot, same eerie stillness, staring. This time, instead of continuing my rounds, I stayed on that side of the building. Maybe if they knew I was watching them, they'd leave. I walked back and forth for about 5 minutes before they turned and walked away. I tried to make out details, height, clothing, anything, but they were too far, and the shadows worked in their favor. I stayed outside for another 10-15 minutes, just to be sure they were really gone. Then I went back inside. By then, it was around 1 a.m., a good time for a break. The break room was at the far end of the building, a small, windowless space with a fridge, a table, and a vending machine that ate dollar bills. I sat down, scrolled through my phone, unwrapped a sandwich, and then I heard it. A noise. I put my phone down, listened. Came from somewhere outside the break room, maybe down the hall. I stared at the door, heart suddenly thudding a little harder than before. It wasn't a loud noise, but it was wrong. After a few seconds, I stood up and walked to the doorway. Waited. The silence stretched long and thin. Nothing. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe the building settling, maybe the wind outside. After a minute or so, I sat back down and finished my meal. Afterward, I went to the security office, checked the system. No alerts, no flags. Everything looked normal. Normally, this was the part of my shift where I'd sit back and count the hours, but something nagged at me. That noise. It wasn't fear, not exactly, more like curiosity. Boredom with an edge. So I got up, started my rounds again. Outside first. The air was still, the streetlights buzzing, the city mostly asleep. Nothing. I went back inside, walking the length of the hall. The building was an L shape, 2 long hallways intersecting. One end had the main entrance. The other end had an old emergency exit, a heavy metal door, ancient, original to the building. As far as I knew, it wasn't even wired to the security system. Instead, the company had bolted it shut, slapped a thick padlock on it, made it useless, or so I thought. When I turned the corner and looked through the door's small window, my stomach lurched. The padlock was snapped clean in half, lying useless on the floor, and the door forced open. For a second, I felt lightheaded, like my brain couldn't catch up to what my eyes were seeing. Someone had broken in. I hurried back to the security office, heart slamming against my ribs, pulled up the footage, scanned through the tapes. There, the 2 men. They had waited until I was distracted, then circled around to the back of the building, snapped the lock, slipped inside, disappeared into the workrooms. And they were still inside when I came back in. One of them had been just on the other side of a door when I walked past, less than 2 feet away. While I was in the break room, eating my sandwich, they were in the next room, crouched in the dark. One of them bumped into a desk while trying to hide. That was the noise. When I went outside for my second round, that's when they ran for it. I watched the footage, stomach turning, hands sweaty on the keyboard. Both of them were armed. Knives, maybe small firearms. Hard to tell. Either way, they had come prepared. Prepared to kill me if it came to that. I called the police. They took the tapes, but there wasn't much they could do. The footage was grainy, the men wore masks. The company reported that some hard drives were missing, sensitive data probably. They seemed worried, but they never told me much. To this day, there's been no word on who they were. No arrests, no follow-up, nothing. But sometimes late at night, when the city is quiet, I swear I feel eyes on me, watching, waiting, and I wonder if they'll ever come back. Story 2. I work the night shift at a hospital, specifically in the ER. I'm the front desk worker, the one who checks people in. We see crazy things all the time, but each night is unpredictable. Some nights are wild. Some nights are quiet. This one started out quiet. A few people came and went, but nothing major happened. I mostly sat at my desk, chatting with my coworker, Amy, about anything and everything just to pass the time. Around 2 a.m., Amy went on break to grab something from the cafeteria, leaving me alone at the front counter. Not even a minute later, the front doors slid open, and a man stepped inside. He wore a black zip-up hoodie and black jeans. His hair was dark, a little long, and messy, like he hadn't showered or had just rolled out of bed. He moved slowly, deliberately, and there was something about him that felt wrong. The air seemed to shift. My stomach turned. He walked up to the counter and leaned in slightly. "I'm looking for Hannah Smith." I didn't remember the exact name, but it was a woman's name. I checked the records, but no one by that name had been admitted recently. As I scrolled through the list, I could feel his eyes on me, watching, waiting. There was something uncomfortable about the way he stood there, shifting from foot to foot. "There's no one here by that name," I told him. "You might want to check the other hospitals in the area." He hesitated, then nodded. An awkward, stiff motion. Without another word, he turned and walked out. I glanced at the security guard across the room. He was already looking at me. We shared a look that said, "Yeah, that guy was weird." Amy came back from break about 30 minutes later. The rest of the shift was slow, uneventful. At 4 a.m., my shift ended, and I said my goodbyes before heading out to the parking lot. The hospital wasn't huge, but the parking lot was massive, way too big for the size of the building. Staff were required to park in the back, far from the entrance, to leave spaces open for patients. As I walked to my car, a strange unease crept over me. My thoughts drifted back to the man from earlier. I don't know why. Maybe it was the eerie silence of the lot, the way the empty cars stood in the dim glow of the streetlights, like metal tombstones. I picked up my pace, got into my car, and locked the doors, tossed my bag onto the passenger seat, started the engine. The drive home was 20 minutes. The roads were empty, the streetlights casting long, eerie shadows. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, followed. My fingers tightened around the wheel, and I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, expecting to see headlights. But there was nothing, just me and the road. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my pulse had settled a little. I parked, stepped out, and went inside, locking the door behind me. I hadn't even taken off my shoes when I heard it. Footsteps, sprinting, right up to my porch. The doorknob rattled violently. Someone was trying to get in. My breath caught in my throat. My hands shook as I reached for my phone. Then, a voice, low, urgent, familiar. "Excuse me, ma'am. Can you open the door? I need help. Please, open the door." My blood turned to ice. It was him, the man from the hospital. I didn't move, didn't breathe. My fingers fumbled with my phone as I dialed 911. Seconds later, the rattling stopped. Silence. Then, footsteps, running away. I peeked through the peephole and watched as he sprinted down the road, vanishing into the night. But there was no doubt in my mind. It was him. The black hoodie, the black jeans, the same unkempt hair. When the cops arrived, they told me something that made my stomach drop. The back door of my car was open. He had been in my back seat the entire drive home. The realization hit like a punch to the gut. That's how he got to my front door so fast. He had been in my car, watching me, waiting. If I had parked in the garage like I normally did, he would have had full access to my house. The fact that I parked in the driveway, something I almost never did, probably saved my life. The police reviewed the hospital's security footage and identified him. They found him a few days later. Just some random guy. I had never seen him before, but he had been watching me, stalking me. He knew my car, my schedule, and all because I left my car unlocked for too long. Even after they caught him, he never admitted to anything. He just kept saying he wanted to talk to me. That was it. Just talk. It's been a while now. I haven't seen or heard anything about him since. But I still check my back seat before getting in my car. Every single time. Story 3. When I was in my mid-20s, I worked night shifts at a 7-Eleven. It wasn't the worst gig. I was still doing online school at the time, and most shifts were slow enough for me to get some coursework done. For the most part, it worked out fine. The store was quiet, the customers were sparse, and whenever someone did wander in, I just push my laptop aside, ring them up, and go right back to my assignments. That night, it was cold. Rain pounded against the pavement outside, and I was grateful for it. Bad weather meant even fewer people. I had been locked into my work for almost 2 hours straight when the front door beeped, signaling someone had come in. I looked up. A man, maybe 30, with a beard and short hair. He wandered through the aisles, moving slow, like he wasn't really looking for anything in particular. After a minute or two, he left, got into his car, and drove off. I barely gave it a second thought. Just another guy passing through. I grabbed my laptop and picked up where I left off. Then, about 30 minutes later, headlights cut through the rain. I glanced up. Same car, same guy. A weird feeling crawled up my spine. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe he'd forgotten something. But when he came inside this time, he walked straight up to the counter. He looked at me. Then, without any lead-up, he asked, "Oh, yeah, it's right over there?" I blinked. "What?" He motioned toward the restroom. I pointed. "Yeah, it's over there." Without another word, he walked over and went in. It was a single-person restroom, just a tiny little thing. I watched the door shut behind him, feeling a little uneasy. Why come back 30 minutes later just to use the bathroom? Was he in the area this whole time? Sitting outside in his car? It didn't make sense. A few minutes passed, then a few more. The odd feeling in my stomach twisted a little tighter. But honestly, I didn't want to be the guy who knocks on a public restroom door, asking if someone's okay. So I let it go. 15 minutes. 20. Almost 25 minutes had passed when a police cruiser rolled into the parking lot. The officer inside slowed down behind the man's car, inspecting it carefully. After a moment, he stopped, got out, and walked into the store. His eyes swept the place before settling on me. "You know whose car that is outside?" There was something in his voice, not just curiosity, worry. I pointed at the bathroom. "Yeah, he's been in there for a while." The officer nodded. His expression darkened. He walked over and knocked, hard. "Police, open up." Silence. He knocked again. This time he banged on it. "Sir, open the door now." Nothing. The cop turned to me. "You got a key?" I could feel my pulse in my throat. My hands shook as I rifled through the drawer under the counter. Finally, I found it and rushed it over to him. He snatched it, jammed it into the lock, and threw the door open, gun raised. The bathroom was empty. My stomach dropped. "But," I stammered. "I swear." He went in. He never came out. The officer's jaw tightened. He took another look around, then glanced up. The ceiling. It was one of those cheap, panel-style ceilings, the kind you could push up and crawl into if you really wanted to. The realization hit us both at the same time. The officer grabbed his radio, called for backup. 15 minutes later, they found him, hiding, in the ceiling. They dragged him out and arrested him right there in the store. Later, I found out why. The man was on the run. Earlier that night, he had done some unspeakable things to random, innocent people. The police had been looking for him. They caught his license plate on a security camera. And me? I was lucky. The people he had hurt before, they had all been alone, in the middle of the night, working, walking, just like me. The cops weren't sure if he was hiding in the ceiling because he knew they were closing in or if he had been planning something worse. Either way, he's locked up for good now, and I never worked the night shift again.